I faked being deaf and mute for 5 years. 5 goddamn years I spent pretending to be a woman who couldn't speak or hear, communicating only through gestures while internally cursing the day I met my mother-in-law. And all of it just so I wouldn't have to talk to her. Sounds like the plot of a cheesy sitcom, right? But this is my life. And today I'm going to tell you how one anniversary party turned my carefully constructed lie into the most absurd farce you could possibly imagine. Buckle up, because you're about to hear a story where sign language became a weapon of mass destruction, and my mother-in-law turned out to be a chess grandmaster who beat me at my own game. It all started when I married my Jack. Great guy, kind, caring, but he came with a mother. Oh, this woman deserves a special mention. Her name is Margaret, but I secretly called her Mrs. Vacuum Cleaner because she could suck all the joy out of any room in 5 seconds flat. She'd show up uninvited, critique my cooking like I was serving her poison, and ask questions that had no right answers. Sweetheart, are you sure you want to work? And who will raise the children? And you do know my son loves meatball soup, not that vegan broth of yours, right? Every visit drove me up the wall. We met once a week, and every single time I'd boil over like a kettle left on the stove. Then one night, after a particularly brutal dinner where Margaret spent half an hour lecturing me on the proper way to iron men's dress shirts, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Jack was already asleep, but my brain was replaying our next inevitable encounter like a horror movie. And then it hit me. I remembered a movie I'd watched the night before where the heroine pretended to be mute to avoid a boring conversation. I sat bolt upright in bed and realized this was the perfect solution. If I couldn't hear or speak, she couldn't get to me. She couldn't ask her stupid questions because I simply wouldn't answer. Best of all, I wouldn't have to listen to her advice. I shared this insane idea with Jack the next morning. He thought I was joking at first, but when he saw my dead serious expression, his face went slack. You're serious? That's crazy. How are you even going to pull this off? I said, simple. I stopped talking to your mother. Completely.
I NUD, I smile, I gesture.
I'll learn a few phrases. The rest I'll wing. Can't be harder than enduring her comments about my cleaning. Jack laughed for a long time, and then, to my surprise, said, you know what? That's actually genius. I'll even help you. I'll tell her you've got hearing issues from an illness. But no going overboard. Okay? And so we began. We picked the day Margaret came over for lunch. I sat there with a vacant expression while Jack solemnly announced that I'd been diagnosed with progressive hearing loss and had temporarily lost my speech due to severe stress. Doctors recommended rest and minimal social interaction. Margaret's eyes went wide. I thought she'd demand medical records, but she just said, good heavens, you poor thing. But don't worry, we'll manage. And that's when my new life started. The first few weeks were awkward. Margaret tried communicating by shouting into my ear like I was completely deaf. I pretended not to hear and just smiled. She'd pass me little notes with questions, and I'd answer with gestures I'd learned from YouTube videos. The problem was, I didn't actually know sign language. I just waved my hands around randomly and hoped it passed for a response. Like when she asked if I wanted tea, I'd make a gesture I thought meant yes, but, as I later discovered, actually meant tomato. Margaret would stare at me in bewilderment but stay silent. But the real fun started when we began visiting relatives. Picture this. A family dinner, everyone discussing politics, and I'm sitting there stone-faced pretending to read lips. One time my sister-in-law asked if I liked her new dress. Without thinking, I gave a thumbs up but accidentally added a gesture that in American Sign Language means bull. Everyone laughed, and I realized I urgently needed to learn at least basic vocabulary. I secretly downloaded an app and started studying signs at night while Jack slept. I memorized signs for food, water, bathroom, thank you, excuse me. Gradually, I got into character. After 6 months, I could carry on a semblance of meaningful conversation. Margaret started getting used to the new me. She stopped shouting and just wrote notes, and I'd answer with gestures. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me strangely, and I'd think she suspected something, but she never asked direct questions. We established a weird truce. She didn't push her advice on me because I couldn't respond, and I didn't engage with her because I was supposedly mute. Idyllic, you might say, but that idyll lasted 5 years. 5 years of communicating with this woman only through gestures, notes, and nods. During that time, we moved to another city, had a son, and Margaret visited for holidays. Everyone got used to my silence. Jack's friends thought I was just shy, and relatives believed my condition was permanent. I became a legend. My mother-in-law even showed me off to her friends like some exotic creature. My daughter-in-law, you see, doesn't speak, but she's so wonderful. Helps around the house and never talks back. Oh yes, I was the perfect silent daughter-in-law. But I noticed something odd about Margaret. In the last year, she'd often watch videos on her tablet. I assumed it was TV shows, but one day I peeked over her shoulder. She was watching sign language lessons. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I thought, is she checking what I'm saying? Is she learning signs to catch me in a lie? But I calmed myself down, thinking she was just being respectful of my muteness, like she wanted to learn the language to truly communicate with me. It was sweet, but the paranoid part of my brain was screaming danger. I even mentioned it to Jack, but he brushed it off. You're overthinking. She's just a sweet old lady who wants to understand you better. I didn't believe him, but I decided not to panic. After all, even if she learned the language, what could she say to me? She'd ask how my day was, and I'd sign fine. End of story. Then everything went to hell at her 75th birthday party. Margaret decided to throw a lavish celebration at a restaurant. The invitation said, Gala Evening in honor of Queen Margaret. She loved pomp. Everyone was there. Her sisters, brothers, grandkids, friends, neighbors. About 50 people. All dressed to the nines with gifts and toasts. I arrived in an elegant dress with my trusty notepad in hand, just in case I needed to write responses. Jack whispered in my ear, "Today's the day. Don't blow it. She'll be the center of attention. No one will bother you." I nodded and sat down between two aunties who also thought I was deaf-mute and treated me like a fragile vase. They'd pass me dishes and speak extra loudly because they thought I couldn't hear. At one point, I nearly laughed out loud but covered my mouth with a fake cough. Jack shot me a reproachful look. The climax arrived. After the speeches, toasts, and cake cutting, Margaret climbed onto a small stage to announce a surprise for everyone. She grabbed the microphone and said, "My dear ones, I want to give you all a gift. I've learned the language my beloved daughter-in-law uses. I want to give a speech for her to express my love." My heart stopped. Everyone applauded. I sat there smiling, but inside I was panicking. She learned sign language? To say something to me? Oh my God. She's going to expose me right here. She'll tell everyone I've been faking. End of my reputation. Divorce. Humiliation. I watched her approach me with a tablet in hand. Not for notes, but for signing. She dropped to one knee like a knight before a lady and started moving her hands rapidly. I expected angry gestures, accusations, a furious pantomime about how I deceived her. I was already mentally preparing to bolt. But what she signed literally struck me speechless. Her gestures weren't smooth but jerky, yet I made out the words. She signed, "I've known for 5 years. You're not deaf. You're not mute. But I want to thank you. Thank you for 5 years of silence. For 5 years when you never contradicted me, never argued, never criticized my cooking, my clothes, my advice. You were the perfect daughter-in-law precisely because you stayed silent. So I pretended to believe in your illness too. I played along because you became so much easier to live with that I was terrified of ruining it."
Især her, mavehagabe.
Jack beside me caught on too. He'd read some of the gestures from her lips and went pale. But it got even better. Margaret continued signing. "And now I want to officially award you the Order of Best Actress in a Family History. You outplayed me. I salute you. But know this, I didn't learn signs to expose you. I learned them to show that I can play the game too. Keep being silent if you want. I like it. Only now we share a secret. We'll both know the truth. And we'll both pretend till our dying days. This will be our shared game." Silence fell over the room. No one understood what had just happened because, apart from me, no one knew sign language. They saw the mother-in-law gesturing while I sat frozen. People started murmuring, "What did she say? Is she crying? Is she happy?" And I laughed. Loudly, genuinely, from the bottom of my soul. I laughed because the absurdity of it all had reached its peak. My mother-in-law, whom I'd hated, turned out to be my ally in the dumbest lie ever. She didn't expose me. She joined the game. I stood up, walked over to her, and signed the gesture for "I agree." And I added a sign I'd recently learned. You're crazy. She understood and smiled. She smiled like we'd shared an innocent prank. The evening ended in confusion, but everyone decided it was some touching family ritual. No one pried. Jack and I drove home in silence, and then he finally said, I never thought my mother was capable of that. You two are insane. I replied, well, now we have a shared secret. And honestly, I've never felt more connected to her. Since then, our lives changed. Margaret and I started signing in public like old spies. We invented secret gestures for family dinners. I could sign to her, this soup is too salty, and she'd reply, I know, but keep quiet. We had our own language no one else understood. We became best friends because our lie turned into a hilarious game. Now I ask you, who was really pretending more in this story? Me, who faked muteness for 5 years? Or her, who knew the truth all along and pretended to believe? Sometimes lies can become the foundation for genuine closeness. As long as you know how to lie well. Imagine our next family dinner a week after the birthday. We're sitting around Margaret's big table. She's invited all her friends to show off her new closeness with me. I'm sitting with my notepad as usual, but now I know she knows. And she knows I know. An invisible thread of conspiracy stretches between us. We exchange brief glances, and I catch her slight smirk. Margaret's friends, elderly ladies with permed silver hair and pearl necklaces, watch me with interest. One of them, Aunt Beatrice, who always found me mysterious, leans toward Margaret and whispers loudly, Margaret, how do you communicate with her now? You learned her language, right? Show us something. Margaret squints slyly and turns to me. I see her hands preparing a sign, and my heart skips. What's she going to say? The truth? Something compromising? But Margaret is a born actress. Slowly and solemnly, she makes the gesture that in our new secret dictionary means, she's my favorite daughter-in-law. But her cooking is terrible. I barely suppress a laugh. I reply with the sign we invented the night before. And you look like a shriveled old ball. She snorts and turns away, pretending she didn't understand. But I see her shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Aunt Beatrice doesn't get it. She blinks and says, oh, how touching. You communicate in your own language. This is real family bliss. I nod and smile my most innocent smile. At that moment, I realize I didn't just survive this game. I hit the jackpot. My former tormentor had become my co-conspirator. All because I pretended to be deaf-mute. But the absurdity didn't end there. A month later, we all went on vacation together. Me, Jack, our little son Timmy, and Margaret. We rented a cabin by the lake. And then something happened that made me question my own sanity. We were sitting on the porch drinking tea when Margaret signs to me. Look, that guy in the boat. He looks like your ex. My eyes go wide. How does she know about my ex? I never told her about him. I was silent for 5 years. I sign back. How do you know? She smirks and signs. I hired a private investigator to check your background when you and Jack were first dating. I know everything about you, including that you're not deaf or mute. It was a test. Cold sweat breaks out. She hired a detective? 5 years ago? She knew the truth from the very beginning? So why did she play along all these years? I stare at her in horror, and she calmly finishes her tea and signs. You passed the test, dear. You survived 5 years of silence. You're stronger than I thought. So I decided not to ruin your game, but to make it ours. I sit there, mouth open, realizing she outplayed me not today, but 5 years ago. She used my own deception to test my endurance, and I passed with flying colors. From that moment, my friendship with Margaret reached a new level. We'd exchange secret signs even in Jack's presence, and he'd get frustrated feeling left out of our female conspiracy. One day he said, you two are driving me crazy. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. My mother and my wife communicate in a language I don't understand, grinning like co-conspirators. Margaret answered him out loud. Darling, it's our little female secret. Don't be jealous. And I signed to her. He looks like a pouting toddler. She snorted, and we both burst out laughing. Jack sighed and left the room muttering about loony bin. But the funniest moment came when our pastor visited. Margaret is religious, and she invited him for Sunday lunch. She introduced me as my wonderful silent daughter-in-law. The pastor, a kind old man with a white beard, started saying something comforting about God gives trials to those he loves. I smiled and nodded while Margaret sat beside me pretending to translate his words into sign language. But she was actually signing something entirely different. She was signing, "The pastor thinks you're a saint because you're silent. But I know you're just a sly fox." I nearly choked on my tea but held it together. The pastor was moved by how we communicated and called it a beautiful example of family unity. I thought I'd burst from laughter. Now, a month after that birthday, I'm sitting here writing this story. Margaret and I video call almost every day. Not with spoken words. She sends me videos of signs. We have entire conversations through WhatsApp. My husband sometimes grabs my phone and tries to decode our videos, but he's clueless. We've invented over 100 signs for everything from "what awful weather" to "your brother's drunk again." The family thinks we're eccentric, but we're both thrilled. Margaret confessed she'd always wanted a friend who wouldn't argue or interrupt. I gave her that, and she gave me freedom from her criticism. But that freedom unexpectedly turned into a closeness I never saw coming. You know what? I realized something important. Sometimes the craziest ideas lead to the most unexpected outcomes. If I hadn't pretended to be deaf-mute 5 years ago, Margaret and I would have kept hating each other until the grave. But now we're best friends sharing a secret, laughing about how we fooled the whole world. Isn't that the perfect ending? Sure, it was mad, absurd, and utterly illogical. But that's life's charm. It's unpredictable. So here I am, wrapping up the story, and I want to ask you, dear readers, could you fake it for 5 years? Or would you have cracked by week 2? Drop your funniest family secrets in the comments. I promise if they're absurd enough, I'll share them in my next video. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories. For now, I'm retreating into my quiet world, where I'm mute but communicating more than ever, just through gestures, and only with my beloved mother-in-law. Catch you next time.